It's not pleasant. It's not easy and it's not pleasant, but go try and tell someone about it. It's like saying, God, I'm so unhappy, I'm so rich, and expecting people to feel sorry for you. So I worry about them, I fear them, and I don't trust them. So you carve your own space for yourself, but the danger is that space is usually an isolated one.
Robert Redford was a man haunted by fears most never knew existed.
Yes, I was very much aware of that. I think I probably took it somewhat for granted because it was so pervasive.
The man who defined American cinema for a generation carried secrets that would have destroyed lesser souls, until his final days revealed truths that changed everything we thought we knew about Robert Redford.
What frightens me more than anything is the shrinking. The environment shrinks on you. I mean, people begin to treat you more and more like an object.
So let's get into it. Robert Redford was supposed to die at 11 years old. In 1947, when polio was America's most feared disease, the future Hollywood icon contracted what doctors initially dismissed as a mild case. But mild cases of polio in the 1940s often became death sentences.
I feel good, just that simple. There's nothing heavier really than that.
That casual mention of feeling good carried weight most never understood. For weeks, young Charles Robert Redford Jr. lay bedridden in his Santa Monica home, watching through his window as other children played freely outside. Before the Salk vaccine, polio meant iron lungs, paralysis, and often death. Before the Salk vaccine was discovered, what hung over your childhood was always the fear of polio, because all you saw were people in iron lungs, Redford would later recall. The experience shaped his relationship with his own mortality in ways that would echo through every role, every relationship, every choice he made. The illness came after he had overexerted himself during an ocean swim, a moment of childhood recklessness that nearly cost him everything. For 2 weeks, he was forbidden from moving, forced to confront the possibility that his young life might end before it truly began. During those bedridden weeks, something fundamental shifted in young Redford's psyche. Unable to rely on physical activity, he began observing the world with an intensity that would later become his trademark as an actor. He watched patterns of light move across his bedroom walls, studied the expressions of visitors, memorized the sounds of the neighborhood. When he finally recovered, Redford carried 2 lasting gifts from his brush with death: an unshakable gratitude for physical movement and an almost supernatural ability to observe human behavior. These would become the cornerstones of his acting technique, the stillness that spoke volumes and the movement that carried emotional weight. But the illness also left him with something darker, a persistent awareness that everything good could disappear without warning. This shadow would follow him through his greatest triumphs and deepest losses, creating the complex internal landscape that made him one of cinema's most compelling presences. The boy who survived polio would spend the rest of his life fighting against confinement of any kind, whether in iron lungs, studio contracts, or the golden cage of celebrity that would eventually consume him. The morning of September 1st, 1959, began like any other for the young couple living in their modest New York apartment. Robert Redford, barely 22 years old and still struggling to establish himself as an actor, watched his wife Lola cradle their newborn son, Scott Anthony Redford. The baby was everything they had dreamed of: healthy, beautiful, perfect in every way that mattered to first-time parents who had barely begun their own adult lives. For 11 weeks, Redford experienced something he had never known before: unconditional love combined with complete responsibility for another human being. The young man who had spent his childhood battling polio and his teenage years running wild through Los Angeles suddenly found himself transformed into a protective father. Every gurgle, every smile, every peaceful moment of sleep felt like a miracle to someone who understood how quickly life could be snatched away. Redford would later describe those 11 weeks as the purest happiness he had ever experienced. His acting career was just beginning to gain momentum, with small television roles providing barely enough income to support his growing family. But Scott's presence made every struggle worthwhile. The apartment felt full of possibility, their future bright with the promise of watching their son grow into whatever he chose to become. November 19, 1959, shattered that future in the space of a single terrible morning. Redford and Lola woke to find Scott motionless in his crib. No warning signs, no illness, no explanation that could make sense of the incomprehensible. Sudden infant death syndrome offered no comfort, only the devastating reality that some children simply stop breathing in their sleep, and medical science had no answers for why. The guilt consumed Redford immediately and completely. Had they done something wrong? Could different decisions have prevented this catastrophe? The questions tortured him in ways that his childhood brush with polio never had, because this time he felt responsible for failing to protect someone utterly dependent on him. The young man who had survived his own encounter with death now faced something infinitely worse, the death of his child. At 22, Redford lacked the emotional tools to process such profound trauma. The culture of 1959 offered little support for grieving fathers, expecting them to be strong for their wives while privately wrestling with their own devastation. Redford found himself unable to articulate the depth of his pain, even to Lola, who was fighting her own battle with grief and guilt. The loss fractured something fundamental in Redford's developing personality. The spontaneous joy that had characterized his youth disappeared, replaced by a hyper-vigilance that would shadow every subsequent happiness. Success, when it came, felt dangerous because it could be taken away. Love, when he allowed himself to feel it, carried the constant fear of future loss. Scott's death also marked the beginning of Redford's complicated relationship with his own emotions. Unable to process the grief in healthy ways, he began burying feelings so deep that even he couldn't always access them. This emotional distance would later become his trademark as an actor, the ability to convey complex feelings through subtle expressions and understated performances. But it came at a tremendous personal cost. In later decades, Redford would acknowledge that Scott's death never completely left him. The loss showed up in small ways he wasn't even aware of, in his protective instincts toward his other children, in his inability to fully celebrate successes, in the melancholy that colleagues sometimes detected beneath his famous smile. The man who would become Hollywood's golden boy had learned its most painful lesson before he was 23 years old: that everything beautiful can disappear without warning, and no amount of success can protect you from life's cruelest losses. The transformation happened so gradually that Robert Redford almost didn't notice it at first. After Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid exploded into cultural phenomenon in 1969, the changes in how people treated him felt initially flattering, then increasingly disturbing, and finally completely suffocating. Success in Hollywood, he discovered, came with invisible chains that tightened with each triumph. Before fame, Redford had been a keen observer of human behavior, someone who could disappear into crowds and study people's unguarded moments. This ability to watch and learn had made him a compelling actor, feeding his performances with authentic details gleaned from real-world encounters. He would spend hours in diners, on park benches, in busy streets, collecting the small gestures and expressions that brought characters to life. Fame murdered that freedom completely. Suddenly, Redford couldn't watch other people because they were all watching him. Every public appearance became a performance. Every casual interaction filtered through the lens of his celebrity. The very quality that had made him an exceptional actor, his capacity to observe unnoticed, was systematically destroyed by his success. The industry's response was to offer him more money, bigger roles, greater control over his projects. Studio executives saw his growing discomfort as a negotiating tactic rather than genuine artistic concern. They couldn't understand why someone would complain about becoming one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood history. Their solution to every problem was another zero on his paycheck. But Redford recognized these offers as golden handcuffs. Each successful film bound him more tightly to a system that valued his image over his artistry. He watched other stars become caricatures of themselves, playing variations on their established personas rather than disappearing into genuinely different characters. The machinery of celebrity seemed designed to turn artists into brands, and brands into objects. His rebellion took the form of increasingly unconventional career choices. While studios wanted him to capitalize on his romantic leading man image, Redford chose projects that deliberately challenged audience expectations. Jeremiah Johnson isolated him in the wilderness, stripping away the glamour that had made him famous. All the President's Men transformed him into a dogged investigative journalist. The candidate examined the very kind of artificial persona that Hollywood was trying to impose on him. But the publicity machine proved relentless and adaptable. Every attempt to subvert his image was spun as confirmation of his versatility and intelligence. The more he tried to disappear into his roles, the more visible his star power became. Film critics praised his willingness to take risks, but audiences often seem more interested in watching Robert Redford than in seeing the characters he was trying to create. The psychological toll was immense. Redford found himself trapped between his artistic integrity and the commercial realities that funded his projects. He needed the system's resources to make the kinds of films he believed in, but success within that system inevitably compromised the very independence he was fighting to maintain. His famous preference for privacy wasn't mere celebrity eccentricity, it was survival strategy. The retreat to Utah, the careful management of his public appearances, the legendary reluctance to give interviews, all represented desperate attempts to preserve some authentic core of selfhood against an industry determined to consume and repackage every aspect of his personality. The cruelest irony was that Redford's efforts to maintain his authenticity became part of his brand. His reclusiveness was marketed as mysterious and appealing. His selectivity about projects was presented as artistic integrity. Even his struggles against the system were absorbed and commodified by the very forces he was trying to resist. By the mid-1970s, Redford understood that he was fighting an unwinnable war. The machine that had made him famous was too powerful and too profitable to be defeated by individual resistance. His choice became either complete capitulation to the system's demands or the creation of alternative structures that might preserve space for authentic artistic expression. This realization would eventually lead to Sundance and his transformation from star to cultural institution. When Robert Redford first read the manuscript for All the President's Men, he saw it as a straightforward thriller about investigative journalism.
No, I'm the reporter from the Washington Post. We talked on the telephone yesterday, and you told me to come on down here, and I'm here.
Two reporters uncover a massive political conspiracy through painstaking detective work. It seemed like perfect material for a taut, entertaining film. He had no idea he was about to create a weapon that would eventually be turned against him by the very industry that would celebrate its success. The film's production proved more complicated than Redford anticipated. Convincing studios to finance a political thriller about a sitting president required careful navigation of Hollywood's complex relationship with power. Many executives worried about alienating Washington connections or conservative audiences. Redford found himself using his star power not just to secure financing, but to protect the project's integrity throughout development. His personal investment in the story went deeper than professional interest. Redford had developed a visceral distaste for Richard Nixon that transcended typical political disagreements. He saw in the president everything he despised about performance without authenticity, someone who had mastered the art of public deception while serving private interests. Nixon represented the dark mirror of Hollywood celebrity, image divorced from substance, charisma weaponized for manipulation. The film's success created unexpected complications for Redford's career. All the President's Men established him as Hollywood's unofficial moral conscience, someone expected to take principled stands on every significant issue. This mantle came with enormous pressure and virtually no privacy. Journalists constantly sought his opinions on political developments, activists lobbied for his support of various causes, and industry figures watched his choices for signs of dangerous independence. Redford discovered that truth-telling in America, even when profitable, marked him as potentially dangerous to those who preferred comfortable lies. The film's message, that persistent investigation could topple the most powerful figures in the country, made him a hero to reformers, but a threat to the establishment that had created his wealth and fame. The backlash was subtle but persistent. Projects he championed mysteriously lost financing at crucial moments. Scripts that challenged authority figures found themselves rewritten during production. Industry whispers suggested he was becoming difficult to work with, demanding excessive creative control or allowing political concerns to override commercial considerations. His response was to double down on independence. Redford began using his own resources to fund projects that studios wouldn't touch, transforming himself from hired talent into a producer and eventually a director. This evolution gave him greater artistic control, but also greater financial risk and responsibility. The creation of the Sundance Institute represented the logical endpoint of this journey toward independence. Frustrated by Hollywood's increasing reluctance to support challenging or unconventional projects, Redford decided to create an alternative system that could nurture authentic storytelling without commercial compromise. Sundance became his attempt to institutionalize the kind of artistic independence that had been systematically eroded by his own success. But independence came at tremendous cost. Every dollar he spent supporting independent filmmakers was money not earning compound interest. Every stand he took on political issues was a relationship damaged with potential collaborators. The man who could have spent his later years collecting easy paychecks for franchise films instead found himself fighting increasingly expensive battles for increasingly niche audiences. The irony was that Redford's resistance to the system ultimately served its interests by providing the appearance of diversity and independence within an increasingly consolidated industry. His rebellion was absorbed and commodified, transformed into another form of content for audiences hungry for authentic alternatives to corporate entertainment. By the 1980s, Redford understood that even the most successful individual resistance could be co-opted by forces larger than any single person. His choice became either cynical acceptance of the system's power or the long-term cultivation of alternatives that might outlive his own career. The truth teller had learned that in America, even the most popular messengers eventually get shot, but their messages might survive if properly institutionalized. By 2020, Robert Redford had survived childhood polio, the devastating loss of 2 sons, decades of industry pressure, and the constant physical demands of a career that had required him to perform many of his own stunts. At 84, he was still working, still pushing his body through roles that actors half his age might refuse. But time itself had become his most relentless enemy, systematically dismantling the physical instrument that had been the foundation of his artistry for more than 6 decades. The accumulated damage was finally becoming impossible to ignore. Decades of horseback riding for westerns had taken their toll on his spine. Years of outdoor filming in harsh conditions had weathered his famous features. The athletic grace that had made him a natural for action roles was gradually being replaced by the careful movements of someone managing chronic pain and the limitations of advanced age. James Redford's death from liver cancer in October 2020 delivered what felt like a fatal blow to his father's spirit. The son who had dedicated his life to raising awareness about organ donation, who had survived 2 liver transplants and channeled his experience into helping others, was gone at 58. For a man who had already buried 1 child and spent decades fearing the loss of his remaining family members, James's death felt like cosmic cruelty. Friends and colleagues noticed profound changes in Redford after this latest loss. The man who had always carried himself with quiet confidence began moving more carefully, speaking more slowly, allowing longer pauses in conversations. The grief was immeasurable, his representative confirmed, using Redford's own words about the unique pain of losing a child. The cruel irony was that Redford's mind remained sharp and his artistic vision clearer than ever, even as his body began demanding concessions to age and accumulated damage. He had stories to tell, important projects to complete, but the physical instrument that had carried him through 8 decades was finally insisting on rest and careful treatment. His reluctance to retire wasn't vanity or denial, it was existential fear. Acting had been his refuge since childhood, his way of processing trauma and finding meaning in loss and disappointment. Without the protective barrier of performance, he would be forced to confront decades of accumulated grief without the distraction of creative work. The admission that he might be making his final film became a recurring theme in interviews, though he consistently walked back such statements whenever pressed. The idea of stopping seemed more frightening than the physical challenges of continuing. Work had always been his escape from the painful realities of his personal life. In his final years, Redford found himself confronting the position he had always dreaded: dependence on others. The man who had built his identity around fierce independence was forced to accept help with basic tasks, rely on assistance for travel arrangements, and trust others with decisions he had always made himself. The transformation was particularly difficult for someone whose career had been built on physical presence and natural charisma. Watching his body fail while his mind remained active created a form of imprisonment that felt worse than the celebrity constraints he had fought against for decades. But even in decline, Redford maintained the dignity and grace that had made him more than just a movie star. His struggle with mortality became its own kind of performance, a masterclass in how to face inevitable loss without surrendering essential dignity or the values that had defined his life and career. The final years also brought a different kind of clarity about what mattered most. The industry battles that had consumed so much energy seemed less important than the relationships and institutions he would leave behind. Sundance, his environmental work, his support for independent filmmakers, these legacies would outlive his physical presence and continue advancing causes he had championed. His acceptance of physical limitations paradoxically freed him to focus on the aspects of his life and work that truly mattered. No longer able to depend on his famous charm or physical presence, Redford was forced to rely on the wisdom and experience he had accumulated over nearly 9 decades of living with exceptional intensity and purpose. Robert Redford died on September the 16th, 2025, at his beloved Sundance retreat in Utah, surrounded by family and the mountain wilderness that had provided refuge throughout his most difficult years. He was 89 years old, having outlived his mother, both his sons, and many contemporaries who had shared his journey through Hollywood's golden age and transformation into the modern entertainment industry. The death itself was peaceful, the kind of gentle departure that seemed fitting for someone who had spent his final years carefully managing the transition from active performer to elder statesman of American cinema. But Redford's passing revealed something unexpected that would reshape understanding of his entire life and career. In the months before his death, he had been working on a memoir that would have challenged every assumption about the man behind the Golden Boy image. The incomplete manuscript, discovered by family members while settling his affairs, contained revelations that explained decades of apparently contradictory choices and mysterious reluctances to discuss his personal life in detail. The document revealed that the icon of American masculinity had spent most of his adult life in therapy, trying to process childhood trauma and the accumulated grief of multiple devastating losses. His famous emotional reserve wasn't natural stoicism, but learned survival behavior, developed in response to pain too great for public expression. His environmental activism, long assumed to be motivated by genuine concern for conservation, was revealed to have deeper psychological roots. Redford had been driven primarily by guilt over his own consumption and privilege, using philanthropy as a form of emotional penance for the resources his lifestyle required and the carbon footprint of his career. The memoir described periods of crippling self-doubt and depression that had been carefully hidden from public view throughout his career. The man who seemed to embody confident American masculinity had actually struggled with profound insecurity about his abilities, his worth, and his right to occupy the cultural position he had achieved. His legendary relationships with strong women, both on screen and in his personal life, stemmed from early recognition that women were more emotionally honest than the men in his circle. Having grown up in a culture that demanded masculine stoicism, he had found refuge in partnerships with women who could express the emotions he had been trained to suppress. The creation of Sundance, his support for independent filmmakers, and his various activist causes were revealed as elaborate forms of therapy, ways of creating meaning from suffering and building something positive from the accumulated losses that had defined his internal life since childhood. Perhaps most surprisingly, the memoir suggested that his most convincing performance had been playing Robert Redford in public for more than half a century. The confident, principled, slightly mysterious movie star had been as much a creation as any of his film characters, designed to protect a much more vulnerable and wounded man underneath. The incomplete manuscript ended with a simple but devastating admission. His whole career playing strong, silent characters had been preparation for never learning how to be vulnerable in public. His greatest performance might have been convincing everyone, including himself, that he had figured out how to live with grace and purpose, despite experiences that had nearly destroyed him. The revelation recontextualized everything. His careful privacy, his reluctance to retire, his support for causes that seemed to matter more to him than commercial success, his creation of institutions that would outlive his physical presence. All of it had been the work of someone trying to transform personal pain into something useful for others. Robert Redford died as he had lived, maintaining his essential mystery while finally hinting at the true cost of survival, creativity, and fame in America. His final act was the gift of permission for others to acknowledge that even the most successful lives can be built on foundations of loss, and that authentic strength sometimes looks like carefully managed vulnerability rather than effortless confidence.